And so on the 7th, wasn't it at the 7th day that the child died? Yes. All beautiful symbols of what must take place in our consciousness, that attitude of prayer, and that it must be a sevenfold attitude, and that then the solution comes, the answer to prayer comes, and it may not look like what we want humanly, but it's the right answer. And of course, after that, Bathsheba conceived on a completely new basis and brought forth Solomon in place. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
One of you came up to me and said you can see that the important thing, let me see if I can get it now, is not the answer to the question about the present situation in Washington that we would like to see corrected. The important thing is the standpoint. Important thing is not to find the answer. So, wasn't that it? But the important thing is to find the standpoint to take to find the answer. Is that right? Now you know who said it. She said it so naturally, so beautifully, and here we try to recreate it, and it's not as natural and beautiful, but perhaps you can feel that the important thing is to know the method for finding the answer, not so much the answer. What's the answer to this question? Well, as soon as somebody gives you the answer to that, you have another question, right? Well, what's the answer to this question? Well, what's the answer to that one? What about this one? And so the important thing is to find the method for finding the answer, right? To incorporate the method, to embrace the method of science that will give you the answer. So that's more important than my being able to sit up here and give you the answer to the situation in Washington, if I could. Yeah.
Getting back to David, he said that his child died the 7th day, and then circumcision occurs on the 8th day. So in other words, he died uncircumcised, which from the Israelite point of view is immoral. So that's probably why he died the 7th day. That was by symbolism too, before the 8th day.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to refrain from speaking about that because I could take off again on another wonderful dissertation about the moral. So many people read that Bible story, those 2 chapters in many parts of the Bible, and they say, "Oh, I guess can't stand this. There's so many immoral things going on, and killing, and David killed so many people, and yet he was always indicating that he wasn't in favor of killing. In one story, we'd have a messenger come to him and tell him, David, I've just killed your worst enemy. What are you going to give to me? And David killed him. And then a little bit later, he speaks against killing. He says you must not kill. It seems so self-contradictory. And that's a big point we have to see with the Bible and with the symbols that are used in the Bible, that they are symbols for metaphysical ideas, for a metaphysical story. So if we read the Bible with our moral sense, we miss the whole point. You'll miss the whole point. Maybe we can talk about that before we take up the short version of David that we are going to do together tomorrow, probably. I imagine tomorrow, late morning or afternoon. And see how we must read the Bible. It must be read in categories, in spiritual, scientific categories, and not with a moral sense. Oh, it's really something. I had one student write me from Canada, and she said that she struggled so with that moral sense within herself that she just didn't think it was right that David had done this and he'd done that, and still he got away with this and he got away with that, and so forth. And when you moralize, you miss the whole depth, the whole spiritual message of it, until you can drop that and see below the surface text, below the text that's on the surface, to the deep structure of the text. And that deep structure is only discernible to a tonality consciousness, to a consciousness of the tonality of the system of the 7 and the 4 and the 4. Then when you read, you just see this sheer beauty, sheer beautiful story. And so we must not also read the surface text of our lives. Our lives have a surface text, and we mustn't read them with a moral sense. Or we miss the working of the Christ. We miss what is really, really going on as a sevenfold story, as a calculus story in our lives. Anyway, that's just a small point, but a small talk, a short talk about a very important point. Well, we were going over the model of being, and I had begun with the hula, the science hula, and someone has just not let me alone since that time to tell me that I did not show you the hula on the level of absolute and Christian science. So in science itself, it's this, the infinite one of science itself. Divine science gives us this sense. I don't do it to be cute, but really, doesn't this convey something quite different than this? And this infinite one, the infinite all, the one being, a one principle, which includes now its own infinite idea of itself. It's the infinite realm of being. This is divine science. An infinite self-containment, an infinite all-encompassment of being, that infinite closed system, which we said is contains infinite openness. And as we begin to focus on that openness, we begin to see the specifics within that infinite one, the specifics within the general. So we sometimes think of that as those specifics coming forth, specific ideas of the infinite one, and those ideas of absolute Christian science then are what break in. They break in on the human condition and resolve the human condition. Resolve everything that is not coincident with the divine within us. Yeah.
What was the sign for it?
I think it's a breaking in of that absolute on the relative. You can make up your own hula because it comes out of your tonality. It's just a tonality thing. You get a tone, a sense of what a level does, of what the purpose or the place value of a level is, and that's just translated into some kind of an expression of it. Okay. All right, Joyce, am I off the hook now? Good. Now, the other sheet that I had given you is the Divine Cybernetic Model. And we've talked a little bit about divine cybernetics here and there. I've brought it in and tried to begin to convey to you the atmosphere of divine cybernetics. And now I want to show you that really the model of being is the divine cybernetic model. So we see that the infinite one being of science itself, when looked at in terms of divine cybernetics, is at the level of divine science a self-organizing system, a divine self-organizing system running on its own self-regulating circuit. That's the calculus. That's how we would describe the calculus in cybernetic terms, that it is the divine input of the Word, the divine processing of the Christ, the divine output of Christianity, and the divine feedback of science. And so on this level, there is no correcting going on. The divine does not have to correct itself. It is self-regulated through its calculus, through the calculus 4, so that actually what we have here is a I want to say a continual God Genesis going on. Being, bringing forth continually new views of itself, expressing continually new views of itself, continually feeding back upon itself in that out of itself, through itself, as itself, for itself. A great realm of the purity of being, of a God Genesis at work, a dynamic God Genesis. But this self-organizing system implies within itself, or implicate within divine science, are the further levels of absolute Christian Science and Christian Science. And absolute Christian Science and Christian Science are showing us the feedback circuits that are implied in the divine self-regulating circuit of the calculus in divine science. And so we have a positive feedback circuit and a negative feedback circuit. On the level of absolute Christian Science, we have a positive feedback circuit. These are circuits that regulate everything. On the level of absolute Christian Science, where there is no error under consideration, we have that sense of a positive feedback circuit of continually regulating the situation, of regulating in respect to the level of Christian Science in an error-preventing way. In an error-preventing way. Do you know in the 16th chapter, when Mrs. Eddy takes the apocalypse from the Bible, she explains there the angel. You know the angel? And I saw another mighty angel come down from heaven. And that angel had in its hand a little book open. And the angel had 2 feet. You know, the little book open, she really wanted to indicate was the textbook, the teaching of the textbook, the explanation of being through the textbook, the science of being that the textbook represents. But she says that angel, she said the angel prefigures divine science. And that angel has 2 feet. You remember the 2 feet. She says the right foot has a right foot or a dominant power and a left foot. And the right foot or dominant power was upon the sea. Remember, upon what? Elementary, latent air, the source of all air's visible forms. The left foot was a secondary power. She says that the left foot or a secondary power was upon the upon the earth, upon concrete air, visible air, dealing with visible air and audible sin, she says. And so we have those 2 feet as though she would depict that divine science has 2 feet, the foot, the dominant of which is absolute Christian science, and the secondary power is Christian Science. The dominant power is the angel's right foot was upon the sea, you see, upon elementary, latent air, the source of all air's visible forms. It's air before it has materialized, so to say, become visible, become concrete. And so it is the office of absolute Christian Science to deal with latent air, deals with latent air. And so it's the preventive practice. The preventive practice of Christian Science is absolute Christian Science. The angel's left foot was upon the earth. That is, a secondary power was exercised upon visible air and audible sin, concrete air. And this is the level of Christian Science, which deals with air that has become visible to us. So the positive feedback mechanism, you see, is error preventing. Error preventing. But if there seems to have been an error that has become concrete, then we know that we have to deal with that with the level of Christian Science. And there we have the negative feedback mechanism. And the negative feedback mechanism is error correcting. Error correcting. I think I said yesterday or sometime that negative feedback is not negative, that both the positive feedback and the negative feedback mechanisms are positive. They work together. They work in harmonious relationship with each other to regulate the system of consciousness, to regulate us, to lead us on, to cause us to advance. Dare I bring in 2 more terms? Am I allowed, or would you prefer not? 2 more terms. Because in cybernetics, we would call that positive feedback circuit on the level of absolute Christian Science, or with the tonality of absolute Christian Science, the the homeorrhea. Homeorrhese. Homeorrhea. And the negative feedback on the level of Christian Science is establishing the homeostasis. Homeostasis. Homeostasis means steady state. Steady state. So there's a principle of steady state, and these sound like it says, I want to remain in a steady state, and the other says, I want to exert a steady. These two work together, and they work together in a kind of a law of they regulate our whole development. Cybernetics having always to do with the Christ idea, with its idea. That's divine cybernetics, is working on us. You see that the positive feedback mechanism of the homeorrhea, the negative feedback of the homeostasis, is the calculus on the level of Christians of interdependence. They work interdependently, and as they work forward, with no possibility of going back, it's a love story. Wants, most of the time, homeostasis. Through this current problem, and then, I've arrived, and that's where I want to stay. Any other problems coming in? I don't want anything to perturb me, and find my balance, my equilibrium, would be the whole purpose of Christian Science, and would make science at all. The Christian Science has, by destabilizing a state that has become too steady.
Would you repeat that?
I don't know if I can. I'll try. Has its purpose is to bring, can only do that by destabilizing any in its state. And remain there. But what we see here, ability is constantly evolving, constantly changing. I'm thinking of my coat. Because I did not have a coat in California. I do not one vintage coat. I was going to say you can see how people get and never move on. Other people had moved on. But this is true in so much the tendency of the human, it's the mortal in the human, to reach a point that we think is fulfillment and is the highest that we can reach. At that point, move us on, we would just stay and stay and stay and stay and reach a point, equilibrium, meaning a state of That's saying it very well. To stand still is to go backwards. See that being is actually construct that we cannot stand still, and so we cannot go backwards. Through the homeorrhea and the homeostasis, we're in something new, something new. It fluctuates us, set of circumstances. And we are destabilized out of the former standpoint. And our standpoint often perceive to be negative. And it's fluctuating me now. It's perturbing me now. I've got to get out of my mental chair and do something about it to us. And that seems to be negative to us. We are continually fluctuated and restated and restabilized. Stabilized, 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 fluctuated and restabilized again. Entry of self-regulation. We are helmic system of being. Isn't that beautiful? Hmm? Okay. What else about that? Isn't it beautiful? Yeah. Yes?
Is latent elementary error. Did you say that it's absolute?
Beat belong to divine science. Absolute, you can see that absolute Christian science, and they are the of, or the explanation of, the explication of divine science. Science explicates itself through absolute and Christian science.
From there, how does the right foot fit in? It fits in. The left foot fits in.
Why don't we, does someone have a textbook? We should probably read that. And I'm wired, so I can't get up. Thank you. Right at the top we can start. This angel, text first. And I saw another mighty angel come down. Bow was upon his head. You see the rainbow of the seven. And his face of fire. And he had in his hand a little book open, and he set his... And she finishes that page. Gotta read it. This angel or message figures divine science. To mortal, science seems at first obscure, abstract and dark. That's the cloud. A bright promise crowns its brow. It is truth's prism and praise. Beautiful. You can heal by its means, and it has for you a light above. Its feet are baptism of the Holy Ghost, whose flames of truth were prophetically. This angel had in his hand a little book open for all to read and understand divine science. She's talking about her own book, Divine Science, or dominant power of which was upon the sea, upon elementary latent air, the source of all. Left foot, Christian science now, was upon exercised upon visible error and audible sin. That's a terrific thing that she gives here. But levels of divine science, absolute Christian science, and Christian science. I don't know what to say. I was going to the David story this summer. We took it in the light, talk very much about these things, about the homeoraison, the homeostasis. I don't know if that's of interest to you. It may not be. And I just wanted to tell you that this comes into the presentation, because I wanted to show the relationship in that matrix that presents the 7x7 story of 1st and 2nd Samuel, that you have a continual interplay and interaction between the homeoraisa and the homeostasis as the self-regulating system governing the whole dynamic of the movement from mind as mind all the way to love as love. And we talked there about attractors. This is something else perhaps that I could mention to you right now. That love works by putting attractors in the field. Now, this is not tractors in the field, but attractors, by attracting. An attractor attracts. And so the homeorrhea, which is always feeding in that which is new, at the point of mind, feeds in, influxes, impels upon us mind, the whole tone of mind. And that homeorrhea knows exactly when the requirements for mind to be mind are fulfilled. And for mind to be mind, it must be mind as spirit, mind as soul, mind as principle, mind as life, mind as truth, and mind as love. When it reaches mind as love, it is fulfilled. Mind is mind. The mind tone is complete and whole. And so there is an attractor in the field of mind, and that attractor is mind as love. And it is attracting everything in the field of mind to mind as love. So you see that in the story, and you would see that in your life, there is a great proposition of mind, and it isn't undifferentiated, but it is a sevenfold proposition, and it has an attractor in it. It has a point of fulfillment in it. And love attracts everything in our experience to that fulfillment. When we reach the attractor, we have been held in the steady state of mind all the way through. Mind is spirit, mind is soul, principle, life, truth, love. When the attractor is reached, the homeorrhea feeds in spirit, feeds in the whole tone of spirit, and sets the attractor for spirit as love. So you have a great presentation of those 7 by 7, and it's a field filled with these attractors that ensure, that's love ensuring that you will reach fulfillment, that you will be steadily, progressively drawn to the fulfillment of the whole story of your life. And that's what we saw this summer in the David story in 1st and 2nd Samuel. So very much a part of divine cybernetics as we consider it today has to do with the attractors that are in the field. And they are all working, it's all working together with the homeorrhea and the homeostasis. That when one goal is fulfilled, love sets a new goal. When the goal of mind as love is fulfilled, the homeorrhea of love breaks in and sets a new goal of spirit as love. When spirit as love is reached, love's homeorrhea breaks in again and sets a goal, and that goal is soul as love. So you have 7 great attractors in that story, attracting everything to love standpoint. And in the final tone, which would be the love tone, you see that the whole tone of love was an attractor for the other 6 tones. And the final point of intersection at love is love is the ultimate attraction, where the whole story is ultimately concluded in its perfection and fulfillment. Well, I know it's a lot to appreciate, especially if you don't have that story in front of you and can't compare these things that we're talking about with the story, to take the story as an example. But it's something that seems to be breaking in more and more and more, that we see how that divine principle, love, works always cybernetically. Always cybernetically. And that through that self-regulating system, we actually cannot make a mistake. Didn't I say that to you yesterday morning? I guess it was, that we actually cannot make a mistake. And we can't make a mistake because of the love in being, because of the love factor, and because of the fact that love is a law of equifinality, what they call equifinality. And this law goes all through nature. They see it in nature. They would see, for instance, how can we explain this law? It's a law that says if you go off the track, the direct line from beginning to fulfillment, if you veer off the course, say they talk about overshoot, and they talk about, what was the false start? They have those 2 aspects. If you have a false start, perhaps you go this way instead of along that straight line. Or if you have overshoot, you may overshoot the direct line and take a line that takes you way, way off, way, way off. And eventually you come back onto what is the direct line, see? If it's a false start, maybe you go down this way, and maybe it's a long, long time before you come back on the direct course. Isn't that a shame? You really lose a lot, don't you? No, you don't. You don't. Because what they see in nature is this equifinality that says that when you come back to the course, it's so incredible to me, when you come back to the course and finally get back on the course, you come back right where you would have been if you'd stayed on. And they prove this. They prove it in nature. They can see it.
I see why that is.
Why is that?
Well, there's one way to see why that is, and that is as you're taking a so-called detour or off the track. Actually, love is making that the track. That is the right track, and I'll tell you why. Because you needed the experiences of mind, spirit, soul, principle, life, truth, and love that you were going to encounter and in its operation of Word, Christ, Christianity, and science on all of the levels. You are that, and you don't go the way, you are the way.
So you don't make a mistake.
So you can't make a mistake. Now, it works differently. I don't know why the reason is humanly. It's just a miracle of translation
a miracle of translation, that on the course that we do take, whatever it is, we have everything, we gain everything that we would have gained if we'd been on the most direct line.
Right. I didn't see that before just now.
This to me is stupendous.
Yeah.
Isn't that love?
Yeah.
Do you mean if you go, say, you're going along and you go off the track, then when you come back on up here?
Where you would have been if you'd
Where you
stayed
would have
on.
been if you hadn't have,
Mm-hmm.
you just jump.
Yeah. They see it in, what was that example we had? Who remembers that example? It was mice?
They fed them, or it took away the nourishment.
Oh, she's good. Huh?
What's this? Is mice.
Mice. Oh, mice. I thought you said Mike.
Well, tell us about that. Yeah, they had all them nutrients, and then they took some and they didn't give them their nutrients. They underfed them. They were starved. But then when they started giving back their nutrients, they found that they were just along with the others. They hadn't lost a thing. As healthy as they
Well, I have to play devil's advocate.
Uh-huh.
If it's going to be there no matter what we do, why should we do this? Why don't we just relax and we'll end up like where we're supposed to be anyway?
Dave.
I don't need that. I mean, I didn't ask you the question. Maybe I should.
It's an excellent question.
I mean, what the heck?
Do you enjoy being malnourished?
No. Well, she says that's the answer. Either suffering or science.
Suffering or science, yeah. Yeah.
And also, maybe when you go that seeming route, those lessons that you need, especially need. So in a sense, it is the direct line because those are exactly the lessons you need.
They're exactly what you need as to correct. Yes, as a correction.
Right.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So not to worry.
Well, in the planets, there's something about the planets, and they bring that out, that they can go off their track.
I don't know.
Gyroscope on a ship works that way, you know. If at times to lean there, the gyroscope tries to steady it. The gyroscope is a spinning instrument on a ship, like a top. You spin a top and it doesn't want to turn. So gyroscope is like a top, a big one on the ship, and it steadies the ship so it doesn't want to turn suddenly that way or that way. Like it's like a top. This attached to this ship that's going around and round. And it keeps the ship from rocking too much. But it's,
That's a regulating device, yes.
Well, there's something about Newton's perturbations, you know.
I don't know that well enough. Yeah. So that's the equifinality of love, and you see how love does that through the homeostasis and the homeoraisa. Yeah.
But in life, like you can think of so many examples where it doesn't seem to turn out that way.
Yes, to the human sense. To the human sense.
And in a short run.
Mm-hmm. In the short run.
Even in human sense, if it's a longer run, you see, you can see more of the picture
Yeah.
work out.
Yeah. The more of the picture you can see, the more you can see the pattern and
Yes, the self-regulating, the self-correcting.
yeah.
But when we're looking at just a tiny little slit like this, well, gee, it looks entirely different. But the more we see of the picture,
That's right.
it makes more sense all the time.
That's why we should always enlarge our perspective to the infinite. Huh? To the infinite, not just holding our perspective always within a certain span of years. Span of years, 80 years, 90 years, whatever it is, and making all our comparisons on that basis and really seeing, well, gee, it's not so true after all, and Christian Science doesn't work, and I'm just going to go out. Everybody else goes out, I'll go out too. We keep that very small, narrow perspective of what life is, of what being is. Uh-huh. Do you ever enlarge your perspective of life to life, capital L, to infinite life, to eternal life, to immortal life? And that we do when we touch the categories, when we work with the categories. That begins to happen, that you begin to experience the immortal calculus and not the mortal calculus, and to calculate with immortality. But usually we measure everything within a certain amount of years, don't we?
Yeah.
And then we say, oh, that was a failure. Did you see he failed? He failed, or it didn't work, or gosh, these are such
Like
big
the Mother
issues.
Church's 5-year plans.
Communist 5-year plans?
Mhm.
What are those? The communist 5-year plans. Increase agriculture.
Well, you know, I don't know whether we're on the first side or the second side. But I think that we could stop here for this afternoon unless you have any further questions.
So you're saying, like,
Yeah.
when you pass and you're in the spirit world, then you can work out your problem there if you haven't.
No, I didn't say that. Don't put that in your notes.
Oh, I was trying to juxtaposition.
Oh, no, I didn't talk about that.
You gonna do that tomorrow?
Point.
I can do it right now. We've got 5 minutes if we want to take it. Okay? We're still on. Marjorie was just asking about the black box, that we hadn't mentioned the black box. And you see up on the level of divine science at the standpoint of the Christ that it says black box process. And that is a term from computer science, as input, process, output, feedback are borrowed from computer science. Of course, computer science being borrowed from the divine infinite calculus. And they call that the black box because they don't know what happens there. They don't know how that processing goes on. It's a kind of a mystery. How the input can become the output. How the input becomes the output. And I love that because I love the fact that Christian Science explains that black box to us as through the Christ, as the Christ, what the Christ is, and what the Christ translation is, how the Christ translation does process, can process everything, can translate and retranslate. And so with what Mary Baker Eddy gave us on the Christ translation, we see that we can understand how the Christ works. But we don't know what the Christ will do. So in that sense, it's still a black box for us. We know how it works. We know what the modus operandi is through those two translations, the translation of immortal mind and of mortal mind. We know how it works, but we don't know the specific outcome. We only know generally what the outcome will be. We know from those two translations that the outcome will be the establishment of the coincidence of our understanding with God's own understanding of himself. So generally speaking, that the processing is called the black box in computer science. That's anything else? All right, then wanted to take with you in other words, I wanted to take the 4 Bible teachings. There are 4. The days of creation, we have the commandments, we have the Beatitudes, we have the Lord. Wasn't that what Mrs. Eddy said should be taught in the Beatitudes and the Lord's Prayer? We've talked a lot about that Sunday, and so here we are. Is that something that that pattern again of the 7, of the word order, and how it is varied from the days of creation to the commandments? We would have to see if they're the same 7. And we find that they are the same 7, the 4, namely that the word takes on same word takes on a Christianity office, and in the Lord's Prayer, so it's word as word, days of creation, word as science, the Lord's Prayer. So we could try to do. Would that be good?
Sounds exciting.
I think this is super.
Great. Okay.